Hello, Bay Ridge. Welcome to another edition of After Hours. This week I wanted to take a few minutes to talk about the true nature of marriage. Just a few minutes ago, we finished having our outside gathering, which has been really wonderful. It's been so good seeing more and more of us being able to gather. The weather is going to keep getting better. I really want to encourage everyone, take advantage of this. Come on out, bring something to sit. We'll probably do a picnic coming up here soon, but let's take advantage of being able to spread out in the field and worship with one another. It's been really nice. But in that teaching, I talked about from Ephesians 5:22-33, and we looked at the church as the bride of Christ. And I point out that that's ultimately what Paul wants us to get, is the church as the bride of Christ. He kind of lets that out of the bag, so to speak, late from like verses 30-33. He's letting that out, 31-33. He's letting us know what the real purpose is. But he does tell us, however, each of you must love his wife as he loves himself, and the wife must see to it that she respects her husband. So he is telling us it does have implications for our marriage. And so I want to talk about what those implications are and what real marriage is meant to be. Well, the first thing, because is what we saw, that human marriage is not the reality, and the marriage between Christ and his people, the church, is the reflection of that. It's really the opposite, because Christ and his relationship with the church is the foundation, and human marriage comes out of that. It means that marriage is actually God's institution, not a human one. That's the first thing that we can learn from this. God's the one that gave us marriage, because it first existed as the relationship between God and his people. So humans didn't come up with the idea of marriage. It's not our institution. It's not our idea. It comes from God, and that means that God is the one who gets to define it. And of course, what that means is the purpose of marriage and the practices of marriage are given to us by God. It's not up to us to determine what we would like the purpose of marriage to be. Hey, you have your purpose, I'll have my purpose. No, marriage has a purpose, and it was given to us by God, and that purpose is to reflect the relationship between Christ and the church, and the practices of marriage that exist to support marriage support that purpose. And any other purpose that we're coming up with, and therefore the practices that flow from it, are likely to be illegitimate. In fact, most of the ones that are being offered today are clearly illegitimate. They do not line up. In fact, they go directly against God's design. And so we are not free to alter marriage. One of the big arguments going on in our culture right now is, well, look, marriage has been one way, but we think we're going to change it. Well, it's not up to us. We don't have the freedom to do that. We can change relationships between human beings however we want, but marriage itself is given to us by God. It is defined by God. It has the purpose that God has so defined, and the practices that will accomplish that purpose. And anything other than that is not simply another way of doing it, it's an illegitimate way of viewing and practicing marriage. The second thing is, because of this prior relationship of God and his people upon which human marriage is based, that means that the ultimate reason for marriage is to be a reflection of Christ and his bride, the church. Any marriage, anything we want to call marriage, must reflect Christ and his bride, the church. Now, you don't even have to be a Christian to do that. Two unbelievers could do that, but only if they fit within certain parameters. For example, one of them is it has to be one man and one woman. Anything other than one man and one woman cuts away at the very essential picture of the relationship between Christ and his bride, the church. Now, this isn't because I say, well, that's the way I think it is. It's because it's actually seen that way in Scripture. In Genesis 2, where we see the very first human marriage, the institution of marriage as it's given by God, God says, for this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. There is a man, there is a woman, and there's only two people who are becoming one. Everything else, whether it is polygamy or polyandry or polyamory, whether it is a man and a man, a woman and a woman, a man and two women, whatever else you want to try and do, it does not fit the design that God gave. And so even when we see in the Old Testament that there are people who practice this, their practice was not what God intended. And in fact, Jesus brings this up in Matthew 19. There's the false statement that Jesus never speaks about this. That's absolutely not true. In Matthew chapter 19, when being questioned regarding divorce, Jesus goes back to the creation account and he says that for this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. They're no longer two, they're only one. Jesus himself points this out, and he brings out the implications that it is two people, a man and a woman, who are united with one another. And so male and female is essential to what true marriage is. We're not interchangeable parts, okay? Two males or two females is not the same thing as a male and a female, nor is one male and three women or one woman and three men. It does not work that way. The essential nature, because it is Christ and his bride, the church, and God is not a polygamist, nor does God find another God. It is a relationship. The picture of it is a man and a woman. So it's essential to reflecting the nature of Christ and the church. But secondly, that's the design of marriage and the purpose of marriage, but there are the practices. And Paul lays those out in Ephesians 5, and I encourage you to meditate and think through those. Paul summarizes it in verse 33 by saying the husband must love his wife as much as he loves himself, and the woman must see to it that she respects her husband. This issue of love and respect that is called for in the passage. Paul uses the word submit earlier, and it's a word that people don't like. We haven't understood it. Submission is not a blind obedience. In fact, it's not even the word obedience. It means to willingly come alongside, to come beside one, to even say, I'm willing to encourage and follow your leadership, and I'm going to support you in your leadership here. And to support it that way, just as the church is supposed to do with Christ. And Paul replaces that with the word respect there at the end. Very, very important. Very often I see when a wife does not respect her husband, it eats away at his soul. There's something that he needs to know his wife respects him. Now, wives need to be respected by their husbands, don't get me wrong. But it is so core and central to who a man is that when he's not receiving that, it eats away and it destroys the marriage bond. On the flip side, and even more foundational actually, is that husbands are to love their wives. In verse 33 is as a man loves himself. But the earlier example is as Christ loves the church. And make no mistake, Paul specifically lays out that Jesus loved the church by dying for her. And I wish I could reduce this down to, well, hon, if the bullet ever comes, I'm going to jump in front of it and take it for you. But this is not speaking of some one big act as my final act in marriage. It is rather a day-by-day practice. Just as Jesus put the needs of the church before his own needs, so husbands are to put the needs of our wife above our own needs. Just as Jesus was willing to suffer and to sacrifice so that his bride, the church, could be cared for, so husbands must be willing to suffer and to sacrifice to make sure that their wives' needs are met. Just as Jesus in honor preferred his wife over himself, so husbands are to do this. That's why I joked on Sunday that, this is our death warrant, guys. But it is the reality. And very often I see where a husband is not loving his wife as Christ loves the church. And we think, you hear guys who want to go to Ephesians 5 and she's supposed to submit. You're a fool if you want to do that, because the prior reality is us dying. And it is a call, and it is the right call for us. Husbands, we need to be about finding out what is to our wife's good, finding out what our wife longs for and desires, finding out the thing that will allow her to blossom, and sacrificing whatever it takes from us to make sure that that is there to love and to care for her. Wives need to know they are cherished. Above all else, that they are loved, that a husband considers there's nothing more precious, no greater treasure to him in the world than his wife. And so we're to reflect on these. And I want to encourage you to reflect on it, because joy is found in this design. It's found, Harm comes when we try to use things wrongly. And if we try and make marriage about us rather than Christ and the church, or we try and build it on our own design, we're not going to follow the roles that God's given. I'm a husband, but I'm not into that, loving and dying. My wife needs to take care of her needs and I'll take care of my own. Then we're going to miss the joy that God has for us. And I want to remind you too, it's an awesome responsibility. We cannot see Christ and the church with our visible eyes. So God has given human marriage to be a picture of that. And as believers, we are in essence telling the watching world, watch and observe. I'm telling the watching world, watch how I love and care for Linda. Watch how I lay down my desires and needs, lay down my life for my wife, and you can know how Christ loves the church. That's a high call. And wives, and how we respond to our husbands, it speaks how the church is supposed to respond to Christ. It's a high call and a high responsibility, but it's also a high privilege. And it could, in this hour where there's so much confusion, so many problems that are besetting marriages, if we would embrace God's call, follow his design, it could be a great picture of the gospel, and it could be a great adornment and support for our proclamation of the gospel. I hope you have a great week, and I look forward to let's gather together each Sunday as we can outside, enjoy the time while we got good weather, and come together and worship God together. I look forward to seeing you later this week. God bless.